Colin Wilson is Head of Regeneration at Old Kent Road in Southwark, but before that he was working in the GLA Planning Department, where he started in 2000 and worked on opportunity area planning frameworks and strategic planning applications. So Colin, you've worked with 3 mayors who had very different ideas about city making, and in spite of those differences, the fundamental idea behind the London plan, that development for London largely took place within the GLA boundary, and that new development should take place within opportunity areas, has held good. So what were the differences between the 3 of them from your perspective?
So with Ken Livingstone, the opportunity area planning framework idea was relatively new. And I think neither we in City Hall or the boroughs were entirely sure about what to do with it. You know, where would it be useful? I think particularly in the early days of GLA, when there was, you know, some doubt about why the organisation existed at all, and was there a need for strategic planning. So I think as we went through the Ken Livingstone administration, it became apparent, kind of initially through the Olympics and the Olympic bids, that there was a role for the strategic body leading on a joined up plan for an area. And in 2006, there was no APF produced as part of the Olympics. And within the planning team, we started experimenting with ways of producing planning frameworks. And that included recruiting staff with the necessary skills, architects, urban designers, people with graphic skills, to start developing that idea. And in fact, one of the first ones we did was City Fringe around Bishopsgate Goodyard, which was Tower Hamlets, Hackney, and with the city. And that was then kind of followed up with Vauxhall Nine Elms, which was at the end of Ken's administration. And the encouraging thing was that when Boris turned up and when Simon Milton turned up, I think Simon Milton really got the idea of strategic planning over borough boundaries, the leverage that you could get from carrying out, putting those plans together. So that idea has evolved over the 8 years with Ken, and then with Boris, in some ways slightly counterintuitively. You might expect a conservative, kind of more libertarian mindset to have thought, oh no, these big plans, why do we need them? But I know Simon Milton could see, I think, the opportunity there, and he really encouraged us to develop those plans. And of course, having got the skills within the City Hall setup that boroughs didn't have, boroughs were quite happy for us to help work with them to produce these kind of wider area plans. And it comes back to very white paper moments. One of the other advantages of doing a supplementary plan to the London plan was you could do it a lot quicker than you could do a local plan. So using Vauxhall Nine Elms example, you know, within a year of 2008, we had a draft plan. You know, 12 months was you know, fairly revolutionary in itself. And the other thing that was very apparent was that you know, to give places guidance and direction, you needed to do things quickly, otherwise the world moves on without you, and you're just left reacting. And over the course of Boris's mayoralty, Ed Lister obviously came in when sadly Simon Milton died, but again, Ed Lister got the benefits of producing these plans, which could then speed up planning process, create certainty. In many ways, do many things the white paper is proposing at the moment. So, you know, we kind of took that process on. Because the Vauxhall Nine Elms process was seen as being successful, we then got Hammersmith and Fulham to work with us on White City. Again, White City, plenty going on there at the moment, being built. And that was something that we started in 2010, and again had a draft of that for 2010, I think within a year again. And Ed kind of encouraged us to do these things in other parts of London, the Upper Lee Valley, the Royal Docks, always working with boroughs, more often than not Labour boroughs. So it cut across party lines. I think everyone could see a benefit to it. And the process carried on into the Sadiq mayoralty. I've not been so involved with that, so I don't quite know where that's got to since I've been at Southwark. But you know, my experience at Southwark is basically taking that experience of that larger more visual plan, giving greater certainty, and producing it in a sort of fairly short time frame, because it gives you the initiative as a public authority to drive the agenda rather than it being driven for you by outside forces and influences. So yeah, I think all mayors were keen on the idea. Labour or Conservative. Took a while to figure out what the idea might be, but once it was there, it was something that could be really driven on. I would say a bit of a shame is that I think that resource which is built up in City Hall, I think isn't quite as big a resource as it was under Boris, and certainly we had got ourselves into a position kind of towards 2016 where we were working on maybe 2 of these opportunity area planning frameworks every year. So we built up this skill set within the planning departments at City Hall. It was very much appreciated in wider audience. I think subsequently that's been kind of drawn in somewhat, and the scope of that activity in City Hall, I think, is more limited than it used to be, which I think is a great shame, because, you know, if you're a strategic body, these are the strategic things you should be leading on, really, in a city.
Yes, well, you talked about 9 Elms and the speed that happened, and I well remember actually the day when Sir Simon Milton launched the 9 Elms OAPF at NLA in 2009. So has the area shaped up as you expected? I mean, it's certainly phenomenal how fast it has taken shape when you look at what has happened in other sites, perhaps in East London, which really haven't gone at the same speed.
So, certainly in 2008, it seemed like an opportunity which had really been missed to that point. So a lot of the effort was directed towards the Thames Gateway, if you remember, throughout the noughties. So the Architecture and Urbanism Unit were mostly looking into East London and works around various Thames Gateway opportunity areas. So as a planning team at GLA, our opportunity was to look into the west of London, where there was less kind of focus from a City Hall perspective. And talking to Wandsworth, Lambeth, and the developers, basically, you know, we came to an agreement that if they would fund the framework, they had no editorial control over it, they would fund it. We would deliver a framework very much based on the urban renaissance, so about density, about tall buildings, about the then London plan. So it'd have an entirely legitimate plan-based basis, but if they could help fund a small team of people to do that, we would produce it, you know, within a year, which we did, working with Wandsworth and Lambeth. I think the previous plan for the area had been called 9 Elms Village, which was a plan for 800 homes and some industrial. So, you know, it kind of changed, complete step change, and certainly, you know, not all the ideas were public sector ideas. So Rob Tinknell had already floated the idea of the Northern Line extension, which of course people would tell you would never work and would never be built. So it was planned together, you know, both a master plan but also a transport plan, also looking at infrastructure. So we were able to do all those things in a comprehensive way. From my perspective, it was really evolving that opportunity area planning framework idea from that decade of, well, how do you do one of those? So this is how you do one of those. Very much doing that within the GLA organisation, so that we had that skill set within the team, and so it wasn't something we were just buying in off the shelf from elsewhere. I think in terms of has it delivered, then yes. I mean, I cycle over Hungerford Bridge when I do go into work, and you know, the tall buildings are where we said they should be. So they sit to the left-hand side of Millbank Tower. The buildings behind Palace of Westminster are lower, so that you can't see them over the top of the World Heritage Site. The linear park is starting to come together. The homes are lived in, so if you get the train to Victoria, you can see clothes dryers and toys and things on the winter gardens. So I don't think it's the case that nobody lives there and this is just all a big investment scam. I know people who live in affordable housing in Vauxhall Mines on the Riverlight scheme. So, what a fantastic place to live in affordable housing. And I think the affordable has got up to about 25% now of more than 20,000 homes. So that's a really significant contribution to London. And of course, the Apple moving into the power station, which had been empty for 30 years and derelict, and the Northern Line extension. I've been down to see the stations, so I've had a tour of the tunnels and the new stations. The first extension to the tube since the Jubilee line. So, and I think that the key difference between all of that happening and the Olympics is, of course, the Olympics is funded by £8 billion worth of taxpayers' money, and Vauxhall Nine Elms isn't. The tube will be paid for by developers. The affordable housing is, the spaces, the buildings. So this is, an achievement which is very much about public-private partnership, and not taxpayers just funding everything. So yeah, I think it's, and actually, the things like landscaping around the US Embassy and the emerging park, it's kind of slowly getting there. You can see the things sort of emerging, and I think the view on the skyline is a great view. I mean, some of the buildings are a bit, on close inspection, are a bit variable in terms of character. I mean, I'd say the bigger view, looking down the river, it all works fine. When you go up close to some of them, you think, yeah, probably would have done that in a different way. But by no means all. I mean, some have been done very nicely, but it's a bit mixed. And certainly, going back to the White City, the white paper piece, I think it's an example of what happens when you do a plan which is far clearer, both through engaging developers, but also engaging local communities. I mean, at that time, 2010, 11, we used to get really big turnouts to public consultation events, because it was something people could get their teeth into and, understand.
At the moment, there seems to be a growing resistance to tall buildings in outer London areas. And so what do you think the impact will be for those when local areas have greater say in what happens, whether they have that say through the new London plan or maybe through the new planning changes that Generic has published in the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think it depends what the offer is with the tall buildings. So the Old Kent Road experience has been lots of tall buildings there, but the idea of having a local lettings policy for council housing and for intermediate housing, which benefits local people directly, the idea of local SIL going on local projects, and I think the idea of having plans which are more explicit about, well, when you say tall, how tall and where. So, whose back garden are they going to appear at the end of? And are you talking about 10 stories or 38? And I think, a lot of the local plans aren't particularly clear about that. I think they're getting clearer. But I think rather than just see it as, well, do you or do you not like tall buildings, but also what are the benefits can be delivered building at that density, it is going to determine the answer to your question. Will people therefore say, well, okay, we can live with that? And certainly in Old Kent Road, I've had conversations with people who've said, look, I don't like your tall buildings, but we could live with them if we can see a social benefit. And I think that goes to another issue, which is trust of local authorities. People have said to me, but how can we trust you as a local authority to actually deliver this social benefit? And how do we know that you're not going to just give in to developers and we get the downsides without the upsides? And again, I think, if you've got a plan which you can be audited against and tested against, that hopefully builds up a bit more trust from all sides of the equation.
Colin, thank you very much for your comments, and also thank you very much for your involvement with NLA over our 15 years, your contribution to the debates that we've been having at NLA, and thank you very much for your contribution to planning in London.
Thanks, Peter.